This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. I honestly believe that this season for the Cleveland Browns, in a ton of different ways, is going to be looked at as one of the most impactful for the Cleveland Browns in whatever direction this franchise goes for the next 10 to 15 years. The reason I think that is if you look at this roster, if you look at who's employed, you have a ton of people at the same crossroads at the same time. Now, this isn't necessarily a good thing. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just a thing. It's a thing that I think every franchise goes through, and it's a thing that we haven't really experienced because in this franchise's last 20-something years since coming back in 1999, the Browns have been so awful, so consistently, so a dearth of talent, so passive in their approach that they've never reached this place, right? That's the first thing I want to talk about. When we talk about the lack of success for the last 20 years, we don't often talk about why it happened. We talk about it as if it happened because we have bad luck. Right? Like it's never really passed off or blamed on a certain idea or philosophy that got us to that place. And I think that needs to be discussed because I think what made the Browns pathetic for 20 years was this franchise's complete cowardice, no matter who was the GM, to make any moves that rocked the boat. Nobody, for 20 years, 20 different GMs, nobody wanted to do anything that was a little bit of a chance, that maybe, rocked the boat a little bit. So instead of trading up or just drafting Ben Roethlisberger in 2004, which would have been a risk, we're going to go and get Jeff Garcia. You know what I mean? Instead of taking a chance on DeShaun Watson, we're going to trade back and we're going to get David Njoku. David Njoku's not a bad player, but I would rather have a franchise quarterback than a decent tight end. This franchise for 20 plus years had been plagued by an inability to make bold decisions, whether they worked out or not. They did not make bold decisions. The quarterback list, right? That famous, infamous quarterback list that we talk about with the Cleveland Browns. Well, look who's on that list. It's a bunch of choices at quarterback that were not bold. You have Tim Couch, who you drafted number 1 overall, and then you went 18 years to Baker Mayfield. And look, say what you want about Baker Mayfield. I wasn't a fan of him at the end, but at least you made a choice. You know what I mean? And look what difference that brought to the franchise, just making a bold choice to go after a quarterback in number 1 overall made for you. But this is what plagued the franchise, was this lack of ability to be bold, this fixation on passiveness. And when you are passive, when you are not aggressive, when you don't make decisions that are going to shake up the status quo a little bit, or have the potential to shake up the status quo a little bit, you know what you're going to get? You're going to get the status quo. And when you were the Cleveland Browns, the status quo was mediocrity. So for 20 years, we got mediocrity because nobody wanted to shake the boat and take a chance at being good. Because they didn't want to be bad. They wanted to be mediocre. So this franchise was mediocre for the last 20 years because we were obsessed with trading back instead of drafting Julio Jones. We were obsessed with trading back instead of drafting this player or that player or Justin Gilbert. We get Justin Gilbert instead of Aaron Donald because we want to trade back and get this and that. We were too obsessed with trying to make the safe pick for 20 years. And this is what safe got us. Nothing. The reason the Browns are at this crossroads is because they've been aggressive since 2018. You can give credit to John Dorsey. You got to give credit to Andrew Berry. But those two dudes being more aggressive than the average man have put the Browns in a different place. It's a place they haven't been at before. It's a scary place. It's kind of like being at the gambling table. You got to become, you got to have the best night of your life, or you got the worst hangover you've ever had tomorrow morning. But either way, you will live today. And that's what the Browns are. They're finally living. It took this franchise 20 years to live, to finally make choices. Think about that, man. Think about that. That's why I applaud any team that makes a bold choice, no matter how much the analytics people or the logic people want to shit on that choice. You know, like when the Texans decide they're going to go after Will Anderson and get CJ Stroud, good on them. They're being aggressive. They want it. They know what they want. They've identified it and they went after it. Will it work out? I don't know. But I would rather a team take chances at being great than continue to not shake the status quo and be mediocre for the rest of their lives. Right? We want our team to either be great or we want our team to take chances at being great. But we don't want to be fans of mediocre teams. We've seen that. The Browns have been kind of mediocre for the last few years instead of bad. And it's been driving us crazy. So that leads me to the crossroads where the Browns are at. I think Kevin Stefanski's at a crossroads. I think DeShaun Watson's at a crossroad. I think Myles Garrett is at a crossroad. I think Nick Chubb is at a crossroads. I think Denzel Ward is at a crossroad. I think the entire offensive line is at a crossroads. What is that crossroads? Well, let's go player by player and coach by coach. If you're Kevin Stefanski, you're at a crossroads because while you were seen as a hot offensive mind in Minnesota, you come to Cleveland, you're the first coach in however long to win a playoff game in this city. I think since the last guy was Bill Belichick. You win coach of the year and you're hot stuff. But then the last 2 years happened and now people are questioning whether you got what it takes. This year will determine how people see you. Will they see you as a Sean Payton-like guy who had a good first year, struggled a little bit in between, got some new coordinators and fixed everything and became a legend? Or will you just be another dude who got fired at his first job? This season determines it. Now, I'm not saying either he succeeds or fails in it's like a binary on and off switch for him. But this team will either hit expectations or not. And if they hit expectations, he's going to keep his job and he's going to have a very long time to build a legacy here in Cleveland. If he does not meet expectations this year, and I'm not one of these people who are happy to jump on the fire the coach train. And if people start doing this in the middle of the season, I'm going to discourage them because I don't think you should fire a coach in the middle of the season. But whether he hits expectations or not, that's going to determine whether he keeps his job. That's just the reality of it. It's been long enough. So he's at a crossroads. DeShaun Watson, I think, is at the most interesting crossroads of anybody because those 6 games, the allegations against him, and the downtime that he's had since 2020 have done great damage to his reputation. Some of that reputation ain't never coming back. Let's be real, right? The off the field stuff, I don't know if that's ever coming back. And I don't know if it should, right? Like he has to do a lot of work in that aspect to make people want to come back to him. But the on the field reputation, it's a little different because he has his reputation has been so far pushed that we forget where he was, and where he was in 2020 was one of the top faces of the game. Now He's an afterthought. And it's not just that he's been gone. It's that he's been gone. And while he's been gone, others have taken the throne. Right? When he left in 2020, it was him and Pat Mahomes. Right? Lamar Jackson was sprinkled in there a little bit. You know, there was definitely Lamar got that MVP. It was him, Pat Mahomes, Lamar Jackson. Josh Allen hadn't come into his own yet. Justin Herbert wasn't there. And certainly Joe Burrow wasn't there. Joe Burrow was still in college. Well, no, Joe Burrow had graduated. I think he got hurt that first year. So Joe Burrow, he hadn't shown himself yet. Those are 3 young quarterbacks in the 2 years that he's gone that have quietly taken his place. And the one that really took his spot, if you want to know where we were looking at DeShaun Watson before, is Joe Burrow. He's took it and he's ran with it, right? To the point where DeShaun Watson would have to catch up to him even if he replicated his 2020 numbers. Because Joe Burrow's been to a Super Bowl and been to 2 AFC conference games. So he's at this crossroads where who's he going to be for the rest of his career? He has 3 options. Is he going to be the boy, what could it have been if guy? Right? Or is that how we're going to talk about DeShaun? What if he just didn't have these things that popped up? Boy, what could he have been? Because in 2020, he was on a trajectory. Like, are we going to talk about 2020 with DeShaun Watson for the rest of his life? It's on the table right now. For real. There's a world that exists where we're talking about 2020 with DeShaun Watson for the rest of his life because he never comes close to touching it again. What could have been if he never had the 2-year layoff? Is that the world we're going to live in with him? That's a path that can happen. Another path that can happen is that he re-enters his name into that conversation. And we kind of forget about the 2 years he wasn't there. Like, it's kind of like how we know Jordan wasn't there for 2 years, but then it really doesn't matter, right? That he wasn't there for those 2 years. It's kind of a footnote in the story of that athlete. That can happen where he not only gets back to the place that he was, he ascends the place that he was. It's a lot of work, but that is possible for somebody that Dabo Swinney once called Michael Jordan in cleats. And then there's another path where he's kind of all right, right? Like, he's just good, pretty good. Matt Stafford good. That'd be great for the people in Cleveland. We'll have a couple 12-win seasons. We'll have a couple high stats, low-win seasons. But it won't hit the same, right? The coaches will be changing all the time. We won't be a stable franchise. It would be better than it was for sure, but it won't be what it could have been. And I think we'll think about that constantly. And that's kind of the fork in the road for this entire franchise. They can go one of 2 directions. Well, one of 3 directions, I'll be fair. The one direction for the Cleveland Browns franchise is that they stink this year. They panic. They get rid of a bunch of people who are pretty decent. And then they just are a dysfunctional mess for the rest of this franchise existence. Well, not the rest of this, for the next 5-6 years. There's a world that exists where, we're all right for the next 5-6 years. We're kind of like the early aughts. Well, not the early aughts, but the early 2010s Bengals, where, nobody's really taking us seriously, but we're always in the conversation for the playoffs. Or we could become a serious threat. And if you look at this roster, I think that's the crossroads that everybody's at. Myles Garrett, how many times is he going to get to 16 sacks, but not get above that or get out sack totaled by TJ Watt before it starts to damage his legacy? I think right now people are pretty understanding that what TJ Watt has done is statistically more impressive. But when it comes to football, Myles is more impressive because he hasn't had help. Now he has help. You can argue better help than TJ Watt. I don't know. Cam Hayward still factors in there, but it's equivalent help. So if he starts to get out sacked this year, well, now the conversation is a little bit different about Myles Garrett. If Denzel Ward can't cover this year, we're not going to be able to follow back on, oh, he was playing zone when he should have been on man. No. It's going to be on him and his inability to play man. This year, the team, the roster, the coaching staff, it's good enough. Like every position, it's good enough, yo. Quarterback, we've seen them be good in the NFL. Offensive line, we've seen them be good in the NFL. Running back, ain't no question. Ain't no question about no Nick Chubb, right? Wide receivers, we've seen Amari Cooper be good in the league. We've seen Donovan Peoples-Jones be a productive wide receiver in the league. We've seen David Njoku be all right. Defensively, it's the same thing. Coaching-wise, it's even like this. Bubba Ventrone, Jim Schwartz, Kevin Stefanski, we know that these dudes can do what they can do. Can coach the sides of the ball that they're asked to and do it very well. We've seen them have great success. So this team can't win with this coaching staff that I would argue is by far the best on paper that they've had. The roster, which I would argue is close to the best on paper that they've had. I think they've had some other rosters that were pretty crazy too. But on paper, factoring into the quarterback position, you feel much better about it. I would argue it's probably the best. The only thing that stands in their way is the other teams. The only thing that stands in the way is them. This is the crossroad that this franchise is at. And this is why I believe that this season is going to be the most important for this franchise's history. Because if they can't win with this team, it's going to be a long time till we find the formula that we can win with. We got a lot tied into this formula. A lot of the future is invested into this formula. And it could pay off or it can't. Again, it's kind of like Vegas. Either you're going to have the greatest night of your life or you're going to wake up with one of the worst headaches that you've ever had. But either way, this year, we going to live. That's for sure. We going to live. This is not a season that you could be passive about as a Browns fan. This is a season that you have to really live each day. That don't mean you go crazy. That don't mean you say crazy stuff in my comment section or on the live stream to me. Don't do that. But that does mean that this season is going to be for the living. And again, they're either going to win or they're going to lose. And that's going to dictate the path of this franchise for a very long time, in my opinion. But that's the stakes. I think this is one of the most intriguing seasons, one of the most important seasons. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below.